All right, folks, it looks like the Biden administration is clamping down on Nvidia's international AI graphics card sales. I've been talking about Nvidia's mission to fuel the global AI arms race, and I guess old Joseph Robinette Biden ain't having any of it. Now, first of all, I'd like to apologize for missing the last couple of days. We've had a hurricane here in Florida this week, and I was busy with preparations. But now the storm has passed, the sun is shining, and there are so many interesting stories that I have missed the opportunity to talk about. But the reason I chose this Nvidia story is because in reading an article, which I will link to, it was very short from Yahoo Finance, just announcing this news. It was pretty brief. I got some flashbacks to the build-up to the Second World War. And I realized if you substitute China for Japan and Nvidia graphics cards for oil, I know things that we don't really think as being analogous, it sounds a lot like FDR's approach towards Japan, which instigated Japan's attack on the United States on Pearl Harbor. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that the attack on Pearl Harbor was justified. All I'm saying is that Japan had reason to attack the United States, and the United States knew this, but I won't get into that here. Anyway, the reason why this is relevant is that the U.S. When we have certain sensitive products that the U.S. does not want to proliferate throughout the world, they place export restrictions on the manufacturers. A good example is the arms industry. There are restrictions on the arms industry as far as who they can do business with. That's why arms deals oftentimes go through the President of the United States. Trump was bragging about how he was Raytheon's best salesman that they've had in years. Certain industries on the export side are just linked at the hip with the U.S. government, and Nvidia's graphics cards are now a product that is in that sort of a category, because the U.S. wants to limit the proliferation of AI training. Now, last year was when they first started to try crack down a little bit and say, you know what, we don't want so many graphics cards going to China. We don't want the Chinese to be able to train their AI so fast. We need to have an advantage over China. And so we don't want you sending your technology from America over to them when we are in an arms race with them and we are trying to beat them. Now, I stated earlier why I said that China already owns or has already won the AI arms race. I can't remember the exact title, but it was something to that effect, that China owns the AI future. But right now, in the present, you could say that the U.S. is exerting what I would consider a very tenuous claim of ownership over the AI industry. Yes, the innovation is here. If you look at Chinese graphics cards, they're not up to snuff yet. At least not the stuff that we've seen that's publicly available. There is a company over there of ex-Nvidia, led by ex-Nvidia employees, which is a common tactic that the Chinese use. The Chinese like to mandate that these foreign companies start joint ventures in China, and that there's a high percentage of Chinese people staffing these companies. And lo and behold, these people who worked for Nvidia for a while went out and now they started their own graphics card company, mainly focused on AI. And no, it's not up to snuff yet, but the Chinese are making progress in that department. For now, though, they are much better off using Nvidia cards to train their AI than domestically developed cards from a company like More Threads. And so this is where the U.S. has decided to try and squeeze China. They've decided to try and restrict the export of these Nvidia cards to such an extent that they are now restricting export of them to the Middle East because they don't want them going to companies or countries in the Middle East that are too friendly with China, because then they could be kind of laundered through one of these countries and then sent to China. China could buy them from these countries, at a bit of a premium. And so they don't want too many of these cards getting out. Well, if the U.S. is successful and they crack down on the export of Nvidia cards, the official export of Nvidia cards to China, China's not able to get as much as they need. And if AI really is as important as the U.S. government feels it is, because if it wasn't important, they wouldn't be restricting it, if the Chinese feel it's equally as important, well, luckily for the Chinese, where is it that these chips are made? Oh, that's right. They're made in Taiwan. That island that China claims to own, that they've wanted to reclaim for decades, that they just haven't had a good enough reason to go and invade, because invasions are bloody and they're not very fun. But it's something that they want. They just haven't wanted it bad enough to actually do it. Well, what the U.S. is doing by restricting the ability of the Chinese to get access to this technology is they're essentially goading China into invading Taiwan. Because if China seizes Taiwan, they seize the manufacturing plants where these chips are made. They will have all of the technical data behind them. They will be able to produce them for themselves. Sure, they won't have access to new innovations from Nvidia, but the Chinese can, they can catch up if they can start with those with all the data and technology that they have there. They can kind of try and develop from there, and it will be better than having nothing at all and trying to start from scratch like they are with More Threads. And so the U.S. yet again is increasing the risk of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Just like FDR's oil embargo on the Japanese made Japan's invasion of the Philippines inevitable, and that, of course, was the motivation behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese had to attack Pearl Harbor to make sure that the U.S. Pacific Fleet was unable to respond to a Japanese invasion of the Philippines to reinforce the U.S. garrisons on that island chain. So you take out Pearl Harbor first, you take out all the ships, take out the Navy, then you attack the Philippines because they will be isolated, and from there the Japanese were able to use the Philippines as a stepping stone to invade the Dutch East Indies, which is where they were eventually going to secure their own oil supply, because the Japanese were reliant on oil imports, largely from the United States. The United States cut off the oil exports to Japan because the U.S. was allied with China. Oh, gee, how these things just go in a circle. In order to defend China back then, the U.S. cut off oil, a key resource to Japan. Now, in order to supposedly defend Taiwan or whatever else, the U.S. is cutting off graphics cards, just sounds funny to say that, to China. And so what is China going to do? China's going to say, well, then we're going to have to get our own graphics cards somehow. And you know what? There's this island that, this island belongs to us anyway. We're just going to march in there and take what's ours. What's that, America? You don't want us using your computer chips, and maybe you shouldn't have built your computer chip factories on our island. That is what the Chinese are going to say. It doesn't matter. I mean, I don't think that the Chinese have a right to conquer Taiwan either. You don't have to think that it's their right. The question is, do they have the ability? Yes. Do they have the motive? They have more of a motive every day. Every day that passes, the Chinese have more and more of a reason to invade Taiwan. Once upon a time, they didn't have much of a reason at all, other than just stubborn pride. And if it stayed that way, if the Chinese had no real logistical gain from invading Taiwan, if it was all negatives, and it was all just stubborn pride to say, yeah, Taiwan really is China, they probably would have never done it. But now they are going to do it. And our government is going to tell us that it's imperative that we, the United States, go to war with China over the island of Taiwan. I mean, it's kind of like how when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I mean, the people who signed up to join the military after that, they never even heard of Pearl Harbor. They just knew, oh my God, the Japs attacked Pearl Harbor. Nobody knew what Pearl Harbor was. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.